It's moving day on the time machine. Well, we're not going anywhere. We're not moving, but we're talking about teams that have moved. Relocation and expansion are a big part of sports history. And it's got a lot of sides to it, the good, the bad, and the ugly. So we're firing up the time machine and asking you to hop in and join us as we talk relocation and expansion on the Sports Pod Time Machine. Welcome to the Sports Pod Time Machine, everybody. Thanks for coming along for the ride. I'm Dimitri Adraktis, as always, joined by my co-pilots Pete Sod and Rich Glanzer. What's going on, boys?
How you doing, Greek?
What's up, Greek?
So we're talking relocation and expansion. I mean, teams do come and go. It's sad, but it's a reality in sports, and it has an impact on fans, on cities, economies, on players. It's a huge part of sports. It's a huge part of sports history. Pete, I know you spent some time in Baltimore, and that's a city that definitely has been affected by relocation. You were there around the time that the Ravens were coming back, actually.
I was there when the CFL actually expanded, and you had the Baltimore CFL Colts, which they then had to change the name to the Stallions because the Indianapolis Colts actually own the Baltimore Colts name. Still to this day, it's one of their trademarks. So I was there and I watched a city that lost football. What was it, about 12 years earlier in '84?
In the dark of night, moving vans, moving the team out under the disguise of the night.
Oh, well, that's a whole other. I mean, before I talk about how it was with the CFL team playing.
And CFL meaning Canadian Football League.
Yes, Canadian Football League.
Mm-hmm.
But you sit there and the way look, Memorial Stadium was a dump. It was a 67,000 seat or 57,000 seat dump. It had been changed so many different times, been fixed so many different ways. The Colts were always threatening to leave at some point. Didn't matter what ownership it was because they weren't getting the revenues that they actually deserved out of the stadium. The Orioles were.
But right there, but before, and you're going to go on with it, but right there, though, you kind of make the point that's going to hover over this whole podcast. I think we feel like these teams are public institutions. Like we feel like we own them. They're part of some type of public trust. But the reality is they're businesses, and they're owned by businessmen who are trying to turn a profit. You can't forget that. And there's nothing wrong with that. That's the reality. Every business is there to turn a profit. So, you're going to tell us the Baltimore story. And we always feel for these cities that lose fans, and we always make these owners into bad guys. But the reality is it's a business. And he was not generating the revenue in Baltimore that he could be generating elsewhere. He was looking to do it. They were not going to make it happen for him. I mean, I'll let you take it from there. But I just wanted to throw that in there because I think we're going to go through basically this, which should be a great podcast here, and talk about times where teams have relocated, the effect on fans, where teams have gone, who should have what cities should have teams, what cities shouldn't. But ultimately, it's always going to come down to these guys are businessmen, and we do have to understand that. Yeah,
so the team is always the Colts were always having problems with the stadium. They just did. Like I said, they didn't have any real luxury boxes in the stadium. What was there was going to the Orioles. The Orioles were complained about the stadium as well. That's why they built Camden Yards. But
which, by the way, probably doesn't happen if Irsay does not take the Colts out, because Baltimore couldn't make the same mistake twice. So in essence, Irsay taking the Colts to Indianapolis indirectly gets Camden Yards built. In a way, I think you could argue.
It sort of does, except for the fact that the city was planning to build a dome at Camden Yards 8 years before they left. The city wanted to build something. The problem is that a city controller who actually fought it put a proposition to make sure no money was spent from the state or the local government to build the stadium. Meanwhile, it would have saved the Colts from leaving if they had built a multi-purpose dome, because that's what they really wanted to do in the 70s. And they were looking towards the King Dome, and they were looking towards the Metrodome, stuff like that. That's where they were going. But he leaves in the middle of the night. The league approves the move. They approve it. Meanwhile, he was looking at Phoenix as a place to go, Jacksonville. He was going to move anywhere and anyone who was going to give him a stadium. Now, Indianapolis,
right? Didn't the state legislature pass a law just a few hours before he left that gave him the right to take over his team?
He had no choice, because if he did not leave that night and run it through, I think they had 25 moving trucks, all going different routes out of the state of Maryland, so the troopers couldn't stop him. By the way, it was an Indianapolis company who the RSA was friends with. That's why they did it, because that morning the governor was signing a law saying the state could take the team over by eminent domain, and they were going to. And they were going to keep the Colts in Baltimore. When they leave, though, Johnny Unitas freaking freaks out, and disavows the Colts legacy that he has. The Baltimore Colts band, which was an all-volunteer band, doesn't go. They stay. They're a professional band that the Ravens use. But this city where football history, I mean, let's be honest, some of the greatest football games in the NFL come from the Baltimore Colts. They were always one of those teams. They just walk away. And it's about money. And, of course, it's about money. But he wasn't losing money. He was making money in Baltimore, selling out that stadium every game.
But not as much as he could be making elsewhere.
Exactly, where he got I think he got a $6 or $10 million zero-interest loan from the state of Indiana. He got a bunch of things moving into the Hoosier Dome, which became the RCA Dome. And he was given so much. They built him a brand-new practice complex. He played no money out for it. I mean, they gave him a lot of stuff. But then all of a sudden, 12 years later, the CFL comes along and puts teams in America. And the Baltimore team was really good. I mean, really good. They sold 30,000 seats every game. And they won the Grey Cup, the championship. And then all of a sudden, you get Art Modell, who comes along and says, I don't want to be in Cleveland anymore. And once again, you got the same problems like you had in Baltimore with the Colts. You've got a dilapidated piece of garbage stadium in the mistake by the lake. And you're not getting what you need out of the city. So what do? But unlike what happens when the Colts leave, when the Ravens come into existence, the league, because of the lawsuit and the settlement they come up with, gets smart and leaves the history of the Browns in Cleveland, so that when they do give it's a suspended franchise, and they only did this one other time in the league's history. They suspended the Rams when they were in Cleveland. I think they were in Cleveland when they suspended them during World War II. They've never done this really other than that. They gave a suspended franchise, and then all of a sudden they did expand. But Art Modell ends up with an expansion team in Baltimore, except he gets to keep his players. They don't go into an expansion draft. And a city, you want to talk about a city that couldn't, it was insane. I mean, it got rid of the Stallions, who now then became the Montreal Alouettes. Yeah, the Alouettes. They became the Alouettes in the CFL. They moved. But it basically – I've never seen a city just change overnight again. I mean, look, the Orioles, they love the Orioles. This is before the Nats played in D.C., and they were the team. But this was a football city. It was always a football city. And to get a team back, it was great. But the league finally did the right thing. It took them a lawsuit and realizing what happened 12 or 13 years earlier can't happen again. You can't let it happen like that, where it's a midnight move and you're leaving a place with a great history with no football. But it is about money. It's all about money.
Yeah, it's always about money. I think there's certain fan bases, though. You're going to play musical chairs in order to make these owners money. But there's certain fan bases that are always going to have teams. I mean, they left Cleveland because there was a better deal in Baltimore, but that fan base was too good. They had to bring a team back to Cleveland. I mean, the Minnesota North Stars leave because there's a better deal in Dallas. But Minnesota is American hockey. They were going to get a team back. Richie, you actually stopped being a fan of a certain team because they left.
Yeah, and you know what? I haven't fully come back. And, what was it? It was December 10th, 1983. The Jets left the love of my life, Shea Stadium, which I still wish existed. And it just went, because it was our dump. And it was our dump. Yeah, they went to New Jersey. And we still got all the games on TV, and it was on NBC. We said nothing changed, right? But everything changed. It wasn't New York anymore. The Jets were a Long Island team. They were Long Island based, and now instead of going 25 minutes to a game, not that I ever even went to a game at the time, because I never went to a game, but you couldn't, and it wasn't the same. They weren't New York anymore, and I still was able to watch them. These poor fans. I know, Dimitri, you said it's about money, and of course it's about money. And they have a right. Businessmen have a right. I get that they have a right. No one says that they should be arrested for using this right. But it's wrong to use the right. Because let me tell you something. I get it. It's a one-man businessman decides the fate of hundreds of thousands, millions of people. Like, you know what? I can make more money, even though I'm filthy rich as it is. I can make a little more money somewhere else, even a lot more money somewhere else. So my one man, my green is more important than millions of fans. And it's just, to me, it's a slap in the face. You don't deserve. You shouldn't do it. Like, you know, unless all other avenues, like with the Islanders, Charles Wong, you know, he had to move to Brooklyn because they just wouldn't let him play in Nassau anymore. You know. So I get it. I understood him, and he could have moved anywhere in the world, and he's like, no, I'm gonna let the fans go to Brooklyn. But outside of those type of moves, where just they're just not working with you at all and hindering you at all costs, because he wanted to build it himself. He didn't want taxpayer money, as far as I remember.
He did. He was willing to build it himself.
Yeah, I just think it's wrong. I think it's wrong what happened to Baltimore. I think it's wrong what happened in Cleveland. Thank God the Cleveland, kept their legacy, which is great. Even though now it's a terrible legacy, but still they kept it. And I just think like the Raiders, the fans in Oakland are so awesome. They're so awesome. They're not going to be this great in Vegas. They should not be called the Raiders.
The Raiders with their – we're in Oakland, then we're in LA, and then we're in Oakland again, and now we're going to Vegas. I find it to be disgusting. That drives me nuts. I also drove me nuts about the Chargers. You know, the Chargers started in LA back in the 60s, but they've been in San Diego for so damn long, and now they're back in LA, and they don't even own their stadium. They don't own the stadium they're going to play in. They can't even fill a soccer stadium with 25,000 fans. So they're going to be playing in the stadium built by the Rams, that's going to seat, I think, 80 or 75,000. Are they going to actually draw? The Rams are going to draw.
Yeah, we all know it'll be road game. It's a road game every day. And literally in San Diego in LA for the Chargers, it's a road game. They have to go through their road signs, you know, because the other fans are yelling so much.
But I think, LA is the great example. Look, LA people didn't go the first time. You say the Rams are going to draw. Yeah, they'll draw if they're good, but they didn't draw last time. You know, the Raiders had issues drawing when they were in LA. The Rams had issues the first. There's a reason those teams left in the first place. People didn't go then. I don't think they're going to go now. There's so many other things to do in LA. Like you said, those Chargers games were drawing crickets, but there's just a need to be in that market because it's the second biggest market, right? The corporate money there is huge. The sponsorship, the sponsor money is huge. Players love being there, and that means something. And unfortunately, all of those things outweigh, you know, what the fans want. You know, what good fans in St. Louis or good fans in San Diego want are all outweighed by that. And the LA thing, I think, is the perfect example of just businessmen just chasing the money, which, again, they're entitled to do. And you talk about fans, I think a great example would be in Montreal. As that situation, I don't think that people, especially of a certain generation, understand. If you caught them at the tail end when you saw that it was just this empty Olympic Stadium, you say, okay, fine, they deserve to lose the team. But from the late 70s to the mid 80s, they were drawing anywhere from 3 to 6 or 7 in attendance in the league. I mean, you know, they had the people singing like, you know, Valderie, Valdorado. Those fans were nuts. It was this awesome like party atmosphere. They were bigger than the Canadians in Montreal. But, you know, I mean, they had Gary Carter traded to the Mets. They didn't re-sign Dawson, so the fans got a little disillusioned. They still kept going, though. And then again, in 93, 94, they were packing the place. And then the strike comes. And honestly, I think this is like a big warning to Major League Baseball, because at that point, the Montreal people were basically like, screw you. Like, if you're going to walk away from us, we'll walk away from you. And they never came back. And you know, we've gotten into this in other podcasts, but baseball's, I think, got to be a little nervous, because I think now you have a lot of markets around the league that would be like that. Like, screw you. If you're going to treat us a certain way, we're not going to come back. But it's sad, because I think Montreal deserves a baseball team. By the way, I think they're going to get one back again at some point. But it's a story where, yeah, fans just got they get a raw deal in terms of the way that they're remembered, but they got dumped on a bit.
And let's look at also the greater effect when a team leaves. It's not just like a team leaves and it has no effect on the game. When Montreal left, it had a lot of ripples. So
UP was out of a job. Thank God the Canadians hired him.
Yeah. Oh my God.
Who did you say?
UP is. I mean, he's like third or fourth best mascot in sports. UP's awesome.
Oh yeah, okay.
Yeah, he's kind of a little bit looks like Rusty Staub, and now he's the Canadians man. Yeah, man. UP's the man, but UP was out of work for a couple of minutes. That was a huge problem.
So it's funny with the Expos though, because so Omar Minaya was the GM, and the owners at that point of Major League Baseball bought the Canadians, the Expos. So they bought the Expos, so they controlled the Expos.
Not to interrupt you, but just leave out one part of the story, that they buy the Expos from Jeffrey Loria so he could turn around, use the money to go and ruin another franchise and destroy another fan base in Miami. But anyway, go on, Rich.
I don't even know if Miami had a fan base necessarily, but anyway, the point is, so what happened was all of a sudden the Expos are good, and it's shocking. And then Omar Minaya decides, let me make possibly the worst trade in Major League Baseball history. But I'll get to that because it's not really fair. It just, and it's funny. So he decides, you know what? Let's go for it because we might not be around. And the only thing that might save baseball is a World Series. So he decides, let's go for it. And let's get who at the time was a great pitcher, but wasn't a legend, Bartolo Colon. And he gets Bartolo Colon, and I think J.D. Drew and Stephen Drew's little brother, or older brother probably, and he gives up 3 prospects. Brandon Phillips, who was the #1 shortstop. He was the #1 prospect for the Expos. Later became a very good second baseman for the Reds. He gave up Cliff Lee, who turned out to be a phenomenal pitcher for the Phillies, for the Indians, and then the Phillies, and Grady Sizemore. And I don't think Grady Sizemore was really looked at as a premier prospect at the time, but Phillips was. And
Lee Stevens might have been in that deal too. Not that it really impacted anything. I'm just trying to remember. I remember Lee Stevens with the Expos, and I think he was in that deal.
So, but the bottom line is, and I went and I looked today how Cleveland was pissed. The fans were pissed. The players are pissed.
Vizquel said that they just gave away the next Bob Feller, and the fans threatened the riot outside of the stadium.
And it's just so funny because what made the deal bad was you got only 1.5 years of Cologne for 18 combined years of those guys. And so
you didn't even get it. He did not get approved to pay Cologne the following year, so they had to trade him to the White Sox for Orlando Hernandez, who had a torn rotator cuff and couldn't even pitch. So it was crazy.
But the point was, just on a baseball scale, it couldn't have gone worse for Minaya, as these 3 players just blossomed. I mean, Cliff Lee became the best pitcher in baseball for a little bit. Phillips became just a steady player, and Grady Sizemore was for a short time a Hall of Fame bound.
Are you saying baseball failed an organization?
But wait, before you go on, the funny thing is, Bartolo outlasted all of them, despite the fact that he already was a premier pitcher in baseball, and those 3 hadn't. I don't know if any of them played a major league game at that point. He lasted by all of them. So if the Expos were able to keep Bartolo for the next 83 years that he played, then it might not have been such a bad trade. But I mean, it rejuvenated Cleveland into a really good franchise. And unfortunately, we saw what happened with the Expos.
I think though you were fair though to Minaya, because I don't think you can fault him, dude. There was talk of contraction.
Yeah.
So at the time he makes the trade,
Minnesota.
Yeah, that at the time he makes the trade, there was no guarantee the Expos were going to exist. And remember, there was a chance, and at the time, a pretty big chance, that their farm system was going to be absorbed by the 29 other teams. So there was no guarantee that he'd be around, no guarantee the team would be around. He's trying to make a name for himself in those couple of months that at least he knows he's a GM. And they're 41-36 at that point. I think the year before they were, I have it here, 68-94. So, I mean, they were miserable the year before. So,
it's just that, you know what?
It was a bad trade, but you have to put it in perspective, which, I mean, you said.
Yeah, we did put it in perspective. But at the same token, if you knew that those 3 guys were going to have the careers that they were going to have, you wouldn't have traded those 3 players, because you don't want that on your resume that you made this trade. Because even though we looked into it and we looked into the reason why, not every owner is going to do that. They're going to be like, oh, Omar Minaya, he made that trade. Well, even if I look into it, my fans aren't going to look into it. So, no, we don't want you.
Well, the Wilpon hired him, so.
Yeah, well, that's
okay.
He's actually, by the way, Omar Minaya is an excellent scout, and that guy has an eye for talent like no other. So
agreed. That's why I really think, even at the time, I mean, he knew what he was doing. He knew what he was giving up. It was just a matter of, I'm going to take a Hail Mary to try to save baseball. But also, I don't want it on my resume that I gave up these 3, but I do want it on my resume that somehow I took a 68-94 team and got them into the playoffs. That would just be as resume gold. So, you kind of understand, what he was doing. But I don't know, dude. Ultimately, I think baseball is going to wind up back in Montreal, and it should. Now, there's other places that deserved to lose their teams that you feel bad for the fans, but they deserved it. I know some of our podcasts, I know Pete likes to represent with his Hartford Whaler stuff. That's a place that and listen, I love the Brass Bonanza. I love the old Whalers uniforms, but they
how they came into existence. You got to remember they were a WHA team playing in Boston. They're playing in Boston, paying rent to the freaking Bruins in the WHA, and then the Bruins don't even want them when the WHA gets merged into the NHL. They don't even want them. They're like, no, they're in our market. So the only place that they could really go was Hartford because it was far enough away from Boston where maybe, just maybe, they'd build a fan base. But to be honest with you, the Hartford Civic Center only sat, I think, 14,500. It was tiny. It's still tiny. But, yes, the fan base there was never really good. They their average draw, I think, in a good year was 12.5 was their average, something like that. But their governor, once again, when it came down to what was going on, when they leave, so the team gets bought, and the owner says, I'm going to stay for 4 years, and hopefully I can build enough fan base, and we'll stay. 2 years in, he's freaking out because there's no fans coming, because he's made this announcement, I want to leave anyway. And they're sitting here, and he starts changing ticket packages and doing stuff, so you can't even get fans coming in. And he's doing it on purpose. Meanwhile, he goes to the freaking governor of the state of Connecticut saying, come on, renovate the Hartford Civic Center. I think it's the XL Center now. Meanwhile, he's too busy trying to convince the Patriots to walk away from Massachusetts and move to Connecticut because he wants to build a stadium, I want to say in Hartford, where UConn plays their football games. And instead of worrying about a team he already has, he went for a team he was never going to get. The Patriots were never going to leave to go to Connecticut because you can't – moving where they were going to move, you're walking away from your fan base. Your fan base is in Massachusetts. Your fan base is Boston, North, and part of Connecticut and Rhode Island. You're moving into Giants territory at that point. It's not a smart idea, and they were never coming. And then he loses the Whale. Now, granted, they just never drew well. They just didn't. But when you get minor league hockey in the Hartford Civic Center, they actually draw well, which is kind of strange.
Well, it's cheaper, though, too, right? It's more affordable to go to a minor league game. And it was a little unrealistic. I think it was Peter Carmenos who bought the team. And he said, I'm going to keep you here if I can sell 11,000 season tickets. But he changed what he defined as season tickets. He refused to count any of like the 4-game, the 6-game, like the 10-game packages. It was like it had to be a full season ticket. And there was no chance they were going to meet that goal. So, and eventually they moved to Carolina again, though, because he was able to get the things that he could profit off of. He was able to get better sponsorship money, luxury suites, which is what every owner craves. It's interesting with the Whalers. Like, can you succeed in any market? Like if you build a winner. So when the Islanders came, they said, well, it's not going to work because the Rangers are there, but they won their 4 cups. I think Long Island was a great market anyway. But they won their 4 cups and they built generations of fans. Then the Devils came, from Colorado, and they said, well, you already have the Rangers and the Islanders, so you're not going to succeed. And it took a while. I mean, people did not go to Devils games for a long, long, long time. But they won over time. It was maybe 3 or 4 generations in, but eventually they got fans. So, I mean, with the Whalers, it's interesting. I don't know. You have the Rangers, you have the Islanders, you got obviously the Bruins, you got the Devils. It's tough to say. I mean, if they were a team that had the success the Islanders or Devils had, would the Whalers still be there? Would they have built a fan base?
It's much like the Nets, though. The Whalers were good in the WHA and the World Hockey Association. They were actually a good team. They played really well. I believe they won a championship in the last year. It was like when the Nets, joined the NBA. All of a sudden, you got to give up Dr. J, and then you're moving the jersey. It's just the way it goes.
Well, I mean, I guess it kind of falls on the relocation, but that's crazy. The Knicks wanted to stick it to the Nets for coming into their market, and they basically they made them pay full boat that kind of fee for coming into their territory. And the only way the Nets could afford it was to sell off Dr. J. Crazy thing, typical Knicks, though, the Nets actually offered Dr. J to the Knicks, who were like, nah, we'll take the money instead. So you know, that's
Nothing's changed with the Knicks. The Knicks have been the same way for 50 years.
You got to blame Dolan.
And Dolan, and we'll blame Dolan anyway. But
Dolan and the Wilpons, they probably came up together like, hey, guys, I think this is a good deal. Let's take the money instead of Dr. J.
Wasn't that Gulf and Western back then who owned them? Or
Gulf and Western owned them. I don't know if that was at that time. I mean, Gulf and Western was, you know, when I grew up going to the Garden, it was Gulf and Western. I just don't know specifically if it was at that point in, 80, 81, 82.
But listen, let me just say one thing here. I do believe that, you have an obligation to stay in the area that you are as long as your fan base supports it. So that's why Cleveland, Baltimore in football, I was dead set against. When the Atlanta Thrashers left, I was okay with that. Let me tell you something. I think the Marlins should move. I think Jacksonville Jaguars should move. I think the Tampa Bay Rays should move. Tampa Bay Rays are such a good franchise. They built it. Unfortunately, a lot of these places, part of the problem is they built it at a place where it's really hard to get to. It's not convenient. Tampa's not a bad – I mean, I've been in Tampa a few times. I haven't seen the stadium.
What's insane?
That's a problem. It's hard to get there. Like they support the Lightning, they support the Buccaneers, and so that's what the only question I have with the Rays, because they're basically going on like a third generation of fans, and nobody's going. But it's been a really good organization. I mean, they've been to the World Series, they go to the playoffs, and again, it's a few generations now since 1998. No one's going. I'm not from the area, but I've been down there. I know they support other teams. And I know the stadium is just not accessible, especially rush hour.
It's also full of New Yorkers. Like, so like if the Mets or Yankees moved there, they would literally outsell the Rays. They would, I mean,
well, the Yankees outdraw when they go down there. There's more Yankee fans than Rays. I mean, the Yankees have their facilities, have their offices down there. So
yeah. So
you got to remember when that building is also a huge problem. The Tropicana field is a dump. It really is not a well-maintained building at all.
I think fans go. I mean, there's dumps that fans go to. I mean, Met fans went to Shea Stadium forever, right?
But Met fans are a little bit different. Met fans were, you lost your National League teams for all those years, and your grandparents and your grandparents went to the games, and they instilled it upon their grandkids. You're going to be a Met fan, and the Mets, 69, you get the Miracle Mets. It's only 7 years after they really. 10 years after it was fast.
62, they, they're teams, they're franchises that just have rabid fan bases and really loyal fan bases, and the Mets clearly.
I'm saying there's a lot of dumps, though. I mean, from all those cookie cutter stadiums in the 70s were not great facilities, but the fans in Cincinnati went, the fans in Pittsburgh went, the fans in Philadelphia went. So I don't want to say that the people in Tampa are not going because it's not a great facility. Maybe it's inaccessible. I really can't speak to that. That's what I've heard. But at some point, if you're not showing up, I think the Rays probably are going to be the team that winds up in Montreal. And and I'm okay with it.
They said that they were going to try to split the games between Tampa and Montreal, which of course would never work. The Players Association would never, ever go for that. And
so they become the X-Rays?
Yeah.
The problem with going to Montreal is, where are you going to play? Dimitri, we've been to Le Stade Olympique.
Well, I don't know if you'd see that. I mean, they might go in there temporarily, but the plans they have for the new stadium are beautiful. And they have the area. That area has been bought. Who's it? Bromfin, who owned the Expos. It's his son now, and he bought the area. You go online, you look up those plans. They're ready to go. So, and I think Montreal will support the team.
So since we're in Montreal, let's move a little over to Quebec.
The Nordique.
So now the Nordiques, and this is again a fascinating thing about how the ripple effect of a team moving changes NHL history by a lot. So Quebec had a really rabid fan base. They were getting 14,000. I mean, the problem with Quebec was Eric Lindros was supposed to, he was drafted by them, refused to go to Quebec, wasn't going to go to Quebec, and that really hurt the franchise. They ended up having to trade him to the Rangers, and for some reason the Flyers got him, but that's another podcast entirely, how the Rangers got screwed by Todd Bertuzzi's uncle. We'll get to that later on another podcast. But anyway, so Quebec decides that after the night, they get all these high draft picks from sucking so long, and then they become the first seed, and they lose to the Rangers in 95. And then they go to Colorado. Now, have you guys ever been part of a game through non-tanking reasons where you wish you didn't win in retrospect? Could you think of a game that I wish I would have lost that game in retrospect?
No.
Because this happened to the Detroit Red Wings. So the Red Wings played the Canadiens, and it was actually fascinating. Mario Tremblay was the new coach for the Canadiens. He got hired, I believe, 4 games in. He was roommates with Patrick Waugh prior as teammates. They hated each other. They got into fights. Tremblay was abusive to Waugh, allegedly. They almost got in a fist fight actually in Long Island at one point. I think that there might have been the coach at that point. Anyway, they played the Red Wings. And, sometimes the goalie, even as great as Waugh, doesn't have it. And what happens when you give up 5, your 5th or 6th goal? You get pulled. No goalie gives up 7 goals. But they didn't pull Waugh against the Red Wings, and the Red Wings poured it on. And the Red Wings ended up winning 11-1. Waugh gave up 9 goals on 26 shots. And at one point, they gave him the Bronx cheer when he made a save, and then he raised his hands like he won the cup. And that's okay in New York. That plays in New York. It doesn't play in Montreal. So Waugh left the bench, and he goes to one of the executives. This is the last game I'll ever play in Montreal. Instead of trying to hey, this guy's our franchise goalie, they're like, all right, let's dump him off. 4 days later, they make an asinine trade, and they give up Mike Keane as well for some reason, and they get Jocelyn Thibault, Martin Ruzinski, and Andrei Kovalenko. It's just really, really a terrible trade. They never would have made that trade to Quebec, ever. They never would have made that trade to Quebec. But they make the trade to Quebec, and it turns out they make that trade to Colorado. Colorado wins the Stanley Cup that year and eliminates Detroit. So if Detroit doesn't pour on those 9 goals on Waugh probably doesn't get traded, and who knows what happens. But they ended up knocking out Detroit in 96, 98, 99, and 99, 2000. They knocked them out 3 times with Patrick Waugh. That's a game I bet they wish they lost in retrospect.
You know what? It's interesting, but Waugh also has that history of being a big baby, right?
Yeah.
I mean, the same thing with 2002 Olympics. I know Gretzky was putting together the 2001 squad for the Canadiens, and he wouldn't promise Waugh the starting job. I think Brodeur wound up starting for them, and Waugh basically just would not come on the team because he wasn't the starter. And then he winds up coaching Colorado, and he actually has success with them, but he also demands having authority over player personnel moves, and they say no, and he walks out. So Waugh has kind of had that history of being a big baby there.
Sure, but when what goalie gives up 9 goals, let alone what Hall of Fame goalie? And honestly, if I'm ranking,
Tremblay wanted to stick it to him too.
Yeah, if I'm ranking the goalies, which is just stupid. You have the best goalie in the world. Why would you do that? But if I'm ranking the best goalies of my lifetime, basically that I watched, so I'm not going to count Ken Dryden, really. I'll start with Billy Smith, Grant Fuhr.
Wade Dublowitz.
What's that?
Wade Dublowitz.
Yeah, he's top 5, no doubt. But my number one is Waugh. I mean, my number one is Waugh for his consistency.
You have Waugh over Brodeur?
I do, for his consistency. Like, he was consistent.
You have anybody over King Henrique?
Just
really?
Demo. So no, I would put 1 would be Waugh, 2 would be Brodeur, 3 would be Hasek, even though I would take Hasek over all of them if we're talking about someone's best game. And the other player that is not on the list, but would like his best game rivals anyone's best game would be Mike Richter. Richter's best game was insane, but I mean, Waugh and Brodeur were just so consistent, and Hasek was great, but not great for as long as those two. So I would go with Waugh number 1 and Brodeur number 2. And Brodeur was not a much better guy than dating his wife's sister, right?
Let's leave Brodeur's wife and his sister out of this here, Rich. But listen, dude.
Brodeur didn't let the sister out, but okay, go on.
It's interesting though. Players, like we just hear there. I mean, players are people too, and I think it's so important where these teams are, right? Whether they're already existing teams, like where teams are huge, because players are people, man. It's like the whole LeBron thing. I know, like Miami, Cleveland. I think most people would work in Miami instead of Cleveland, right? I know he took a lot of grief for that, but I guess the point is that when these teams, where you are matters, and I think you see that like with the Coyotes, I know the Coyotes had a lot of financial issues after moving there. Who was the owner? Is it Moyes at the time? Who he files for bankruptcy,
Yeah.
and basically the NHL has to step in, and it was like 10 minutes after he filed for bankruptcy, they basically took away his ability to run the team. And one of the guys who wanted to come in and buy the team, he wanted to buy the Penguins at one point. He wanted to buy the Predators at one point. It was Balsila. He wants to move them to Hamilton. Now, Hamilton definitely would support a hockey team way better than Arizona would. Hamilton would have gone crazy for a hockey team.
Where's Hamilton?
It's across from Detroit.
Yeah, and it's in Canada, home of the Tiger Cats. But the thing is, though, Arizona has the TV market. Arizona has the corporate money. Arizona is a place where players would rather be, that's a big deal in order to stay relevant in free agency. I mean, Arizona is not Hamilton in 10 different ways. And so when you talk about relocation, you talk about expansion, certain cities just have advantages over others, and leagues just want to be in certain places. And Arizona is one of those places. It's not really a fit when you look at it and you say, wow, I mean, Hamilton would definitely support a team better than Arizona would be. But Arizona is Arizona. This just huge, maybe the fastest growing market in the United States and in North America. And the NHL wants to be there. And you can't blame Bettman. So I think there's so many things that go into this,
Greek, you kind of nailed it, though, when we were discussing what happened to the Nets with the Knicks. If you move a team to Hamilton, you're now infringing on Detroit's rights, and they're going to have their own problems. And Detroit is not going to – they're going to voice the loudest – objection to them moving right across the bridge to the city in Canada. It's going to be, that's a mess.
I was reading, by the way, that that's never happened, that there's nothing in like a team, I think it's 75% approval for a team to move. But if a team moves into another team's territory, which would happen with Hamilton, Detroit would have the right to pursue legal action. And that is uncharted waters for the NHL, because I don't think that a team ever has pursued that legal action. Like, for instance, the Rangers basically came to an agreement that allowed the Islanders to come in.
The Whalers too. They figured out a way not to. They left Boston and we ended up in Hartford. But that would have been that's a problem already. But you're right. But you're talking about Arizona. You're talking about a team that was in Winnipeg from the WHA. They move there. They go bankrupt, and then the league moves the Atlanta Thrashers to freaking Winnipeg.
Well, here's the thing with that. One, obviously Winnipeg, it was rampant, for the Jets to come back, and just like Quebec's rampant for the Nordiques to come back. Part of the problem, because I think a lot of people think the Nordiques will come back, and I actually am one of them. But then when I was doing the research on this, part of the problem was they don't speak English in Quebec. Like the national when they scored. Matter of fact, I think there was a Canadian coach. The first Canadian coach was they all had to speak French in order to become the Canadian coach until recently. So, I mean, I think that's going to be a problem. Very few free agents are going to want to go and raise their kids. Keep in mind, some of these kids in a city where they don't speak English. So I think that's going to be a really big problem in some of these things. And I don't think a lot of fans, including myself, really never thought about this, is that as much as the fans might want them, players matter too. If no player wants to play in Quebec, keep in mind, like the Islanders lost Tavares, because he didn't know. Very few people want to play on Long Island. They're going to want to go somewhere else. No offense.
I'm glad you brought up Tavares, though, because that's kind of one of those things where we forget that these guys are people. With Tavares, and I guess it fits under this. Islander fans obviously have vilified him, but I'll tell you from people around him and around the organization. I mean, the story is his fiance at the time, Erin. I really think he expected to come back to the island. I really think he did. When he said he would be back, he would be back. But she wanted to move to Toronto. And he never was, the guy's a gentleman. He's not going to throw his new wife under the bus and, make her the villain. It's reality, Rich. People move.
I think he wanted to move too. I think
listen, no one can go inside his head, but from friends, from ex-teammates, from league insiders, the belief is that, listen, this is who he's choosing to spend his life with. And she wants to be near her parents. She wants to raise her kids near her parents. And he went along with that. And I think the only point that I'm trying to make is that I think these guys are people, and we forget that, and they just want to be in certain places. I remember Mike Hampton leaving the Mets for Colorado because the schools were better. Now, listen, no place has better schools than like the North Shore, Nassau County. But that aside,
because Dimitri teaches there, everybody, and Dimitri teaches at the old high school I went to. He wanted to go to a legacy high school.
Must not have been a great school at the time because that school's not on the North Shore, Nassau County. But anyway, yeah, you had a great geography teacher, by the way, Rich. But anyway, so the thing is, like, for him, I don't know if it was about schools, but he wouldn't be the first guy to move to Colorado from New York because he wanted a better quality of life, right? So, like, they're people. And so I think when you consider where you want these teams, like a place like Arizona, or moving franchises to places like Miami, or moving franchises to places like LA, players want to be there. Fans want to take trips to those places. So there is something, about having your franchise in places that people want to be.
A little segue, two things that I think need to be said since you mentioned Tavares and Mike Hampton. So let's get two things. One, you can't blame, like, you have to, the blame, the Island fans hate Tavares because he's like, I'm gonna play with you guys next year. Like, I plan on it, so don't trade me. Well, Garth Snow should have put out a piece of paper and said, sign me, sign here or we're trading you. And he should have given an ultimatum there and then traded him because, make him make a decision right on the spot because that's just the way it should have went down there. So I blame that on Garth Snow. And it has to be said anytime you mention Mike Hampton, as much as the Met fans were upset with him because he won the National League MVP for the division, for the championship series, they ended up getting David Wright. They ended up getting a draft pick, which they used on David Wright. So it all worked out pretty well for the Mets and not so well for the Colorado Rockies.
Yeah, and I think the other that's true. I think the other part of it is also when you go to a market, is being ready, for a market and having stars in the right places. The most recent, as of this recording, the most recent lottery in the NHL was fixed in the Rangers' favor, right? Because the league wants a star. They want a star. They don't want the next Connor McDavid to just languish in Edmonton again where nobody can see him. So, okay, we're going to put him with the Rangers.
People ruined their careers. Gary Bettman ruined his risk his legacy just so he gets the Rangers, even though the ball for Toronto literally went in and out. And I'm sure that was fixed somehow too.
Wait a minute. David Stern did it for the Knicks, so I don't know.
These are all, we're not going to, I think this is a good time right now to take a break and maybe just kind of like,
Well, no, because this time to talk about Gretzky going to LA because hockey, fine. It was kind of humming along. It was okay. The Kings were successful, but they tried other franchises out there. So the Kings were out there, but the Seals failed. The Rockies failed. Other teams failed out there. I think one of the things, so there was this understanding, right? You had the Golden Seals that then wound up going to Cleveland and becoming the Barons, then getting absorbed by the North Stars. You had the Rockies that became the Devils. So maybe at the time they just weren't ready, but you also need star power. And I think the league realized, and by the way, the NHL, the way they have changed their expansion. Now, with the new expansion rules, you can have a team like Vegas just win automatically, which I think helps a new market. Yep. But they also understand that you've got to get good players to these new markets, that you got to get star players to these new markets, that you got to find a way to make these teams competitive in these new markets, because it's one thing to go out there and just be in a different market and then try to build your fan base. But if, the Thrashers are going to be terrible in Atlanta and the Seals are going to be terrible in Northern California and the Rockies are going to be terrible in Colorado, it's hard to work. So I think that's another thing that they've learned is let's find a way to get these teams competitive fairly quickly, and let's find a way to get star power into these markets fairly quickly.
I also think that if you talk about the thing that hurt the NHL the most, it's probably Gretzky getting traded to LA, because even though it was a boon at the time and it led to all this expansion, it led to too much expansion, it led to teams that really, teams that I probably shouldn't even have teams, and it didn't really, I don't think it worked in the long, at least it worked in the beginning because LA was a hot spot for hockey and it became a Southern sport and it was great, but it kind of languished a little. It certainly was just a phenomenal thing. I actually remember where I was when they traded Gretzky. I remember it was August 9th, 1988. I was in Chicago seeing the Mets. It was the first night game ever in Wrigley Field. the first night game ever was supposed to be 8-8-88, but it got rained out. So it was the Mets versus Chicago. And I remember going to my hotel room. Me and my dad got into a huge fight, and we weren't talking. And we're in Chicago. We're all upset. I look on the TV. I'm like, that looks like Wayne Gretzky. But, you don't see Wayne Gretzky in New York a lot. And I saw him in ESPN, and I was just like, that is Wayne Gretzky. What happened? In my head, I'm like, he couldn't get traded, but he did. And it was for Jimmy Carson, I believe. I mean, just a terrible trade.
You know what, though, and it's traded. By the way, it doesn't help hockey in the South. LA's in the West, Rich. You and your geography are
Southern. No, but I understand that.
Okay.
Southern sport.
Listen, you decided to associate you with my high school, so now I have to jump in and correct these
early onset that's coming in again.
I got to step in and
you need to do something about that, Richie.
Only 5 years older than you, so just
50. I know, 50 years older. I got you, man.
49.
But with hockey and its expansions in this, all over the place. How many times are you going to put a team in Atlanta?
Right.
And it's going to fail.
That's an interesting story, though, with Atlanta, because it's one of those things where, like, all right, fine, they don't deserve to have a team, but at the same time, the first time when the Flames were there, for that time period in the NHL, when teams weren't drawing, they were actually drawing like over 10,000 people, and then they went to Calgary, but then. Yeah,
but you nailed it. They were drawing 10,000 people to a building that was obsolete the day it opened. It had no luxury seating,
right?
None. That was its biggest. That's why they had to go. The building was obsolete the day they opened up.
But then they come back as the Thrashers, and then even then, like they drew over 17,000 in the first year, and they actually didn't draw terrible. The problem was they wound up with an ownership group where the guys were suing each other. Then they get taken over by another group that basically only bought them because they wanted the Hawks and they wanted Phillips Arena. They didn't even want the Thrashers. So now they're owned by guys that don't even want to own them. So like the Atlanta thing is interesting. Like it didn't work, but it's almost like you think that maybe it can work. I don't know. It's one of those things where I don't know if it can work or not. Like I don't want to rule it out.
There's just too many other places that would wrap. Like, I mean, I know they're thinking of Seattle, Oklahoma City, probably.
The Kraken.
That's a great point. The Kraken. But you know what, Rich, you're right. And we forget that, though. Expansion does it definitely puts money into the pockets of the owners, but it does water down competition. And sometimes we forget the effect of expansion on baseball, where there can only be so many good pitchers, right? Yeah. And once you expand, well, now you're hurting the game. And even whether it's the NHL or the NBA or the NFL, the reality is there's only so many good players in the world. There's so many great players. And when you're trying to, expand that pool, it's not always going to have a great effect on gameplay. But I will tell you this, anyone can move. We might remember, even the Yankees at one, and people say, oh, that was a stunt by Steinbrenner.
It was.
No, let me tell you something. To a point, maybe, but you got to put yourself back into that time period. And it's only you go back to the beginning of the podcast. Camden Yards opens like 92, and at that point, that's a shiny new toy that now all the owners want something like that, and Steinbrenner wants something like that. But at that time period, the Yankees, yeah, they're not drawing because they had a couple of bad years. But they're still the Yankees, dude. The area was not safe, and that's a big issue for Steinbrenner. If you can't guarantee my fans' safety, and they're not going to come here, then I don't want to be here. Also, he saw what the Orioles had. He saw what other teams were planning. He wanted that, and I'm going to tell you, Giuliani, Mayor Rudy Giuliani, if he does not wind up as the mayor, I think two things. First of all, he's a big Yankee fan. He's willing to work. He understands how important the Yankees are to the city. He's willing to work with Steinbrenner on plans for a new Yankee Stadium. But it's his decisions and his initiatives that not only start to bring people back to the city to spend money, to go to Broadway again, to go to restaurants, bring businesses back, bring people back to see the Rockefeller Center tree, but also take people back to the Bronx, make people feel safe going to the Bronx. Plus, the Yankees started winning again. But I'm going to tell you, Rich, that wasn't a stunt. That was for a while Steinbrenner looking at his wallet and saying, if I've got to go to Jersey, then I've got to go to Jersey because people are just not coming to the Bronx right now for whatever reason.
ever thought that was ever a 1% chance.
Okay.
I really didn't. Like, I mean, and I think a lot of people knew that it wasn't going to happen.
Okay.
It didn't because of certain factors, but it very well could have, Rich.
Hold on. I grew up going to the games at the stadium in the box next to Steinbrenner's. He was never there, ever. So I'm sitting in the luxury box next to him because that's the company box that my dad was at, and Steinbrenner was never there. I'd go to games probably 2-3 times a month. Never there. He was never there because there was a reason why he was never there. He was planning. He was planning, but it was also a game. He was playing chess.
Oh, of course.
He was making a point, though. He made a lot of points by not showing up, not sitting in the owner's box all the time, because he was angry about how the neighborhood was. The neighborhood sucked. It was awful. I remember being driven in, and I'm going in with my dad, and I got his friends, and it's like, you can't go here, you can't go there. Just let's go in the elevator up there. Let's go. And once the game's over, gotta get out of here, and especially night games. Oh my God!
It's still not like, you know. I mean,
it's not a bad neighborhood at all now anymore.
Still, it's not like, you know, it's not done up like, you know, like when you go to Boston, you know, you could go to so many bars right after the game and stuff like that. I only went to one Yankee Stadium, under the new Yankee Stadium, and you know, we were in and out. It didn't, you know, parking was ridiculous. Was it $45-$50 for a regular season game against Anaheim? I mean, it was just it's not as well done as other like when you go to Boston, it's an event. If you want to make it an event, you could just go to the game, but you could also make it an event. You could make it a whole thing. Yankee Stadium is not really like that. Same thing with Citi Field.
Well, I mean, I think they're looking to develop the area around Citi Field, but with Yankee Stadium, you know, I think especially a lot of the diehards, you do have the bars, the pubs across the street, the souvenir shops, and I think people feel comfortable. No, it's not the area around Fenway, and it's certainly not the area around Wrigley, but a lot of Yankee fans spend the whole day around there, feel fine doing it, but did not back in 90, 91, 92.
Try 87, 88.
Well, a lot of that was because Mel Hall was on the team, so you had to like watch out.
Yeah, keep your kids away. Absolutely. But no, you know, but the point is though too, even there, and you're right. I think for the most part, Steinbrenner, he's a businessman, very successful businessman. He's playing chess. But if the factors that he needed to fall into place didn't fall into place, I'm not so sure that he wouldn't have left. The Jaguars, I mean, are they the next team to relocate out of the professional teams that are currently out there? And now a different type of relocation is we say, all right, going to a different country, fine. We've already been to Canada, so we can't just say it's the first time we're going to another country. But, you know, taking a team to London. I mean, is this the next frontier? Yeah.
I think they are. That's why do you think this Tottenham Hotspur Stadium was built to handle American football? I mean, they're planning this. This is a plan. It's going to happen at some point. I think it's going to be the Jaguars because they don't draw. They have a problem drawing in Jacksonville.
And they always go to London, right? They're the team that always goes to London every year.
Yeah. I think they're kind of making it I think they were getting it ready, getting London ready for the fact that Jacksonville's probably going to end up there.
Go ahead.
How far a plane ride is it? Because you guys know I'm not great with geography. How far is it from Seattle to London or LA?
Yeah, that's a problem when you're going from the West Coast, and so they're going to have to change the scheduling. So it's one thing when you're going to New York to London. Okay, that's not an issue. Going from Seattle to London, that's an issue where what they're going to have to do is they're going to have to double up. And you're going to basically have to play, let's say, you're going to go play the London Jaguars, and then maybe the next week they're going to have to play the New York Jets, the Giants, the Eagles, maybe play somebody on the East Coast. So they're going to get those 2 weeks. Really what they would do is maybe always have to follow that with a bye or precede it with a bye week, and then also maybe an East Coast game and kind of group that together. So
with the bye. But, I mean, if they're going to have 16 games, and I think they might have they might have 17 games now, right? 17 games it's probably going to happen or – I don't
know if that went through or not as of this recording.
Yeah, I'm not 100% sure of that. I don't think it did this year, but I mean that might have been a COVID thing. Who knows? That's the thing. Who knows what's going to happen in the future? But also, then we're talking about exhibition games. That's going to be a lot. There's going to be a lot. I agree. I agree. The NFL wants that to happen, but that doesn't mean the Players Association wants that to happen. And there's still a lot of things that could make it fall through.
No, agreed. It's but again though, you're going back to this theme. It's a new television market. It's a new fan base. There's more corporate money. You're tapping into the London money. Then eventually they're going to want to tap into the Paris money. They're going to want to tap into all the major cities in Europe. But either way, it's more corporate money. It's more sponsorship money. It's access to a new population, to a new fan base. It's a huge TV market. That's what they're going for. They're not going for the blue collar fan in Baltimore, the blue collar fan in Cleveland, if those other things aren't attached to it. And, you see that pattern, and it's sad. It's sad because, teams come and teams go, and fans are the ones who are affected. Go, like Pete said, you go all the way back to the Giants and the Dodgers and how those people cried and bled for those teams.
Killed my father, killed my mother. And again, let's to bring it back. They have the right, but it's the wrong thing to do to use that right.
But with the Dodgers and the Giants, you can thank really one man for why the Dodgers left, and that was Robert Moses, the guy who built all the roads and all the infrastructure around New York City, when he refused to build what became Shea Stadium in Flatbush, which is now where the Barclays Center is. He refused to build a stadium in Brooklyn. He wanted to build a stadium in Queens, and the Dodgers didn't want to play in Queens. So when the Dodgers decided that they're going to pick Chavez Ravine in L.A., all of a sudden, you got to have another team in your league on the West Coast. And who's there? Well, the Giants. The Giants weren't playing real well, and they wanted out of the Polo Grounds. The Polo Grounds was like Ebbets Field. It was falling apart at that point in time. So why not move? And then they built Candlestick at the worst place you could ever build a baseball stadium. But that's a whole other story.
But the interesting thing, though, and yeah, you're going to move around because you're going to have to follow the money. But I do think, though, that the wrongs get righted in terms of they realize where the really strong fan bases are. So they knew how strong that giant Dodger fan base was, and so the Mets are born. They knew how strong that Baltimore Colt fan base was, and so the Ravens are born. They knew how strong the Browns fan base was, and the Browns came back. They knew how strong the North Stars fan base was, and so the Wild came back. They knew how strong the Winnipeg Jet fan base was, and they went back. So I think that teams move around so that these owners can get the best possible deals. But ultimately, like the really, really, really strong fan bases, they know there's money there, and they're always going to go back to those fan bases. And you've seen that historically.
With the Mets, you forget, though, the reason why you get the Mets is because there's a third professional league being thought up to be brought in, and they're going to put a team in New York.
Though, unlike the Steinbrenner thing, which the Steinbrenner thing was mostly chess, but a little reality, this was all, they knew what they were doing by making this threat.
It was coming. But the same thing with when you talk about we're strong family. Think about when the NHL expanded, when the Islanders come into existence. The Islanders come into existence at a time when the WHA is talking about putting the team in freaking Madison Square Garden. And to stop this from happening, and then they got a brand new arena on Long Island, put the team there. It's not
also why Trump gets involved with the USFL, thinking that he's going to call these bluffs and he's going to get a team out of it in the NFL, which didn't end up happening.
I want to say one more thing. It's we're talking about fan bases that are that they're going to do the right thing and bring them back. So this is I'm going to go to WWE wrestling. So there was this bad guy, a heel named. Just listen. So this guy named Elias, and what Elias would do is he'd rag, as all good heels do, they rag on the local sports team, and they get booed for around 12 to 13, 14 seconds. Well, he went to Seattle and mentioned the Supersonics leaving Oklahoma City and how that was good that they did that, and he said that in Seattle. He got booed for more than 2 minutes, which, think about it, that is a long time for a boo. 2 minutes worth and probably more of booing. And that fan base, they want their team back. They're going to get a team, and I'm going to be happy for them.
Which is different, right? I think
Elias and the WWE.
We're going to have to thank Elias. But they're going to get their team back as opposed to, let's say, the Grizzlies, that he could have made that same statement in Vancouver, and they would have been like, what? We had a basketball team here?
Well, so the Supersonics, that they want, because of what happened with the Browns, that legacy, OKC has the legacy with them right now. But when they put another Supersonics into Seattle, and they will be the Supersonics again, the legacy is going to split, and they're both going to essentially have the same legacy. They're coming from the same place. It was all based upon how the NFL did the deal with Cleveland and keeping the Browns' legacy.
Oklahoma City then has Seattle's legacy, and
right now,
is Oklahoma City going to give it back? And then
I understand. I read two different articles. One was that they're going to have to give it back. The other one was they're both going to share that legacy.
That's
that
stupid.
they both. But I've read both. It's a little
will Oklahoma City will Seattle have Oklahoma City? They don't want it. They don't want Oklahoma City's legacy. So
no.
Yeah.
They would just be
they're holding it. Yeah, they're holding it in trust. We're just saving the legacy for you.
By the way, what a great team Oklahoma City could have been with Harden, with Durant, with Westbrook. If they were in Seattle, maybe they would have been able to keep all three, and maybe they would have been able to win a championship and stop those rascals from Golden State stealing all those wins and stuff like that. So it could, again, people moving. This changes the legacy. This changes the history of the game, possibly.
Oh, absolutely. No, you know what? I guess a butterfly effect, the sports version, right? You change one thing, you change everything that happens after it.
Yeah.
So,
you got LA Clippers, who were the freaking San Diego Clippers, who before that, where did they play? They played somewhere before that too. They're the Buffalo Braves. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
If they don't win a championship with Kawhi and all the other players they have, George and Kawhi, then they got to move. Like, honestly, I'm sorry. Nobody cares about you anyway. They will stop looking at you the second you become bad again. You got to move. They should have to move to Seattle the second they win like 30 games in a season.
Wait, if the Clippers don't win a championship, they have to be blown up immediately and
immediately. They get
evicted from the Staples Center?
I don't think their owner, Steve Ballmer, is going to let that happen.
He's already building. He's already in plans to build a new place right down the street, his own little palace that he doesn't have to share with the Lake Show.
They better win because they have such. You know what? I'm tired of them, being terrible, and then they finally get good, and they've never made the conference finals, right?
Well, listen, it's a new season. I mean, they've got LeBron that they're going against. They have Anthony Davis that they're going against. So we'll see.
I'm just tired of it. I'm sorry. You've been such a bad organization. I mean, the Clippers were always the worst team in sports for every kid, like in our 40s. We're all in our 40s, including myself. The Clippers are always the worst team. No matter what team you're talking about, you always knew the Clippers and mostly the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, but the Buccaneers won a Super Bowl, so they kind of now we could move them past them. But no, the Clippers are just a terrible franchise overall. They're finally good. Now let's do something.
Well, there you have it. So I think that's going to wrap it up for relocation and expansion, because Rich is ready to dismantle the Clippers and send them to Siberia. So that's going to do it for us. It's time for us to get the time machine fired up and back to where we came from. So wherever, whenever, and however you joined us, we thank you. We appreciate it as always. We had some fun, spend some time with you. Hopefully you guys had some fun with us. So for Pete Sod, for Rich Glanzer, I'm Dimitri Draktis. This has been the Sports Pod Time Machine presented by Yackers Huddle. Until next time, take care, everybody.
Copyright 2021 Yackers Huddle Media Group, Inc., all rights reserved.